She's very good. Well, I thought if they hadn't seen it, I would have them. No, they were all in.
I'm gonna be rude and walk around in front of you so I don't knock
No,
the
no,
whole
no, that's
laptop
fine.
off. All right, it's 3 o'clock, so welcome to the Iowa Files. My name is Gail Brubaker. I'm the Executive Director for the West Des Moines Historical Society, who just lost a tree on Thursday night, and my heart is breaking. Want to thank you for coming here today to the Iowa Files, which is sponsored by the Friends Foundation of the West Des Moines Public Library, the library itself, Bravo Greater Des Moines, and our donors and members. So Kevin Williams is now the vice president, right, of which historical society is it?
Colfax.
The Colfax Historical Society. He is a naturalist, an explorer of many, many interesting things, including taxidermy. If you want to hear a program on that, let me know. A nationally known expert on restoring antique and heritage crockery, and a font of knowledge about Colfax's amazing history as being a vacation spot and a spa area because of their mineral waters. So it's with great pleasure I introduce Kevin Williams.
All right. After listening to that, that's a mighty impressive fella that you've got here today. We'll see what your opinion is when I'm done. Hopefully that's still the case here. But really, what all that means is that I've done a lot of different things. I've had a lot of different interests over the course of my life, and yeah, jack of all trades and master of none really probably could fit with several of those. But just by way of explaining a little more of how I got here, my wife and I both grew up in Colfax, in and around Colfax. She was a town girl, I was a country boy here, and graduated together from the high school, and then went on to do careers. And my wife, we both graduated from Iowa State. My wife was a medical technologist, so she worked in the lab at Marshalltown Hospital and McFarland Clinic for her career. And I, after the state a little bit, then I went on to, my degree was in fish and wildlife biology. So I went on to work for the Grundy County Conservation Board. And I used to tell the fellows that worked for me, I've done every job in this department. So I know exactly, don't try to snow me here. I know exactly what it's like to be park ranger. I know what it's like to be naturalist. For almost 20 years, I was the director of the department here, but I was a conservation officer during all of that here. So, but upon retiring, we have been active with the Historical Society. And actually, after the Skunk River flood of 2010, it's when we got involved with our town and the damage that had been done to the museum. And the museum received extensive damage there at that time. The sad part of it is that the new museum was under construction at the time of the flood. So nothing had been moved into the new museum when the flood occurred. So there was a loss of some items, which was sad. But we now have this beautiful museum there in Colfax, and I invite you each to come and take a look at that here when you have the opportunity there. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the museum as we go along. For the most part, I'm going to talk about Colfax history, and we focused on the mineral water. Colfax was known for the mineral water during a period of time, an era there, nationally known for mineral water. Now, when you ask, there's a lot of people that shake their head and don't know what in the world you're talking about, but hopefully I can enlighten you about those things here. So to start, the slide that I've got up here is the number 8 coal mine. Now, bear with me because I'm going to start talking about coal, but I'm going to finish talking about the mineral water here. Shortly, we'll be to the mineral water. Coal was discovered in Colfax about 1846. So before there was a town, that area they discovered coal. Coal was very important to Iowa, of course, during that period of time. Wood and coal is how you heated things, how you ran the boilers, anything that was needed. And it was because of coal that we ultimately are talking about mineral water. Now, the Rock Island and Pacific Railroad was making its way east to Des Moines. So about 1865 is when the railroad was looking for coal. They needed a source of coal. Colfax had that. And so they established a depot there. There was a post office about the same time that happened as well. All right. In fact, there were 3 different depots, train depots, that were in Colfax at one time. The Rock Island and Pacific, and was the Colfax Northern Railroad, which was a railroad just to serve the coal mines that were surrounding the area. And then there was a third, the Interurban Railroad. And I don't know if you've ever heard of the Interurban, but it came out of Des Moines and went to several different towns around central Iowa. The first one that it went to was to Colfax in 1903. So the Interurban was there quickly too. Colfax as a town was named after Schuyler Colfax. Now, Schuyler Colfax was the first vice president under Ulysses S. Grant. He was a famous Tennessee legislator, and so there are lots of Colfax towns in different states, Colfax townships and counties all over the country, and Schuyler Colfax was the namesake of those. All right. I told you I was going to talk about coal, and I, of course, have to plug my great-grandfather, if you'd let me. That's the guy that's circled right there, David D. Williams. He came to Colfax as one of the many miners that came to Colfax and were employed there around the community. I like to tell people this photo was taken before they worked that day, because look how clean the faces are. Right? When they came out of the coal mine, they were black. You know, it was not good conditions there, certainly, that were to work in those mines. But there were a number of mines around Colfax. One time there were 29 different mines and most of those around the area. There were several towns that existed there for short periods of time while the mines were operating in that area. So the town of Oswalt, the town of Severs, and the town of Andersonville were all mining communities that existed for between 10 and 20 years and then went on. But 1,800 people were associated with working the mines at one time. Many nationalities, but English and Welsh were predominantly the ones that came and worked those mines. Now, my great-grandfather came as the mine boss for one of those towns, and it was finally to the water that we've come, and that's the railroad was searching for more coal. Right? They wanted another source of coal closer to Colfax than what they were finding. And it was about a mile outside of town that this crew working for the railroad, they were boring, all right, looking for that source of coal. And at about 300 feet, a little more, they struck a vein of water. Now, that's not uncommon. What's uncommon is it was under pressure. So that's what we call an artesian well, when you hit it and it comes all the way to the surface. And it came out, do you remember the old Beverly Hillbillies television show? All right, up from the ground came this bubbling crude, and up from the ground came this mineral water. Now, it didn't smell good. It didn't taste good, because it contained many, many minerals. Right? They recognized, the crew there recognized in tasting it, that this was strange stuff. The railroad sent it off to Chicago to be tested. And the test came back with this list of arm's length long of different compounds that were in that water. And almost overnight, people began to come to drink the water. Right? They wanted to take that water home, because right at the right time, 1875, when that water was struck, right at that period of time, mineral water was something that the medical community said it's good for you. And so people began to come. And by 1878, the first hotel had been built out there right at the site of that mineral well. And people came, a 3-story wood frame hotel, and they came to stay. There were baths and stuff already associated with that. So that hotel had places for you to bathe as well as to drink the water. It was called the MC Springs, is what they named that. It was magnesium chalybeate or something was the pronunciation of that. They just shortened it to the MC Springs for short. All right. It wasn't the first hotel in Colfax. There was one right downtown in Colfax that existed. It was called the City Hotel. Right now, the City Hotel later was purchased by Carl Mason in 1881, and he changed it to the Mason House. It sat right down across from the depot. So if you wanted to catch people coming off the trains, you were in the best spot for that. Right across the street from that hotel was a mineral springs, and it was a city-owned, open to the public springs. So, and remember, it's under pressure. So all it did was sit there and was ready for people to drink or fill their containers. And so that was the closest hotel to the depots. Now, what I like about it is that the Mason House, of course, I mean, they're this big hotel that you can see. But all the other hotels that weren't within sight of the depot, they would have their own taxis, horse-drawn taxis that the driver would holler out, all aboard for, the Grand Hotel or the Colfax Springs Sanitarium there, so that people who were coming already with reservations for those places would know where to go, load up, and they'd take the baggage and go to the respective hotels. This is the Grand Hotel. It started out as the Coles Hotel, and Samuel Cole ran a hotel in Colfax, and in the wintertime, he ran a hotel in Florida of the same name, Coles Hotel. So he moved back and forth between those two places, and later, still owning the hotel, he changed it to the Grand Hotel, and then it was named the Grand Hotel for the duration of that time. Now, we've got the spring house right here. That's where the spigots were that you'd fill your containers. But you see the veranda, that front porch that's there. They tore that hotel down in 1977. Right? In fact, I didn't say. There's only one hotel that still stands in Colfax, from all of those that were there. But underneath that porch area, I have loved to dig bottles my whole life. And so when the last trucks were driving out of that place, I'd been watching. I was hoping there would be some treasures coming out of the ground under that old hotel. Well, there were. This little jug, which was from that MC Springs out there at that hotel, there were 5 of those in under one of the window wells of that old hotel under the porch there. So my dad, who said I would never dig a whole Colfax jug, I came in that night. It was dark by the time I got home, but I said, "Look at here, Dad, I've got those." Now, that's a neat little thing, but you didn't need a lot of the water if you were buying something like that. You bought it as 5 gallons or 10 gallons, or there were all the way up to 55-gallon drums of water shipped out of Colfax to places, but. When? 1977? 77. Yep. Yeah, it had gone the way of many of the hotels there at Colfax. By that time, they were apartment buildings, though that kind of use. There's one hotel still remaining, and I'll show you the picture of that here coming up. Come here, there we go, the Victoria. Now, it started out as Siloam Springs. It then became the Adams Hotel. It was then named the McMullen. As they would change owners, they changed the name. It was longest as the Victoria, and that's this jug here that's advertised in the Victoria Sanitarium. And they bottled their own water as well, and I like the advertising on that jug. Trained nurses and bath attendants there. Yeah. And then there's the Spring City Hotel. The Spring City Hotel was built by Dr. Abner Fry. And Abner, he was an interesting fella. He started out, grew up in a town called Red Rock. You ever heard of that? And the lake is called Red Rock because of that town that's underwater now. But he grew up in Red Rock. He tried farming for a while, like his dad, and that didn't really work out. And he tried being a storekeeper there in the town of Red Rock for a while. That didn't work any better. He even sold Singer sewing machines. But it's when he decided to go down and train under a Dr. Paul Castor in Ottumwa. Now, Paul Castor was a magnetic healer. Now, it's got something to do with like chiropractic, okay? I'll stop there. But that kind of healing. He studied under there, and then he decided, okay, I'm going to come up to Colfax where they already are drinking the water and think that's a great thing, and I'll use my trade up there. And so he built a hotel, called it the Spring City Hotel. Then if you look in the newspapers, you'll find that even before it opened, it went to a trustee sale. So something wasn't going right. Ultimately, he bought it back about a year later, and this time named it the Fry Hotel in Mineral Springs. All right, and there's a stereo view of that hotel. There, the Fry Hotel, it operated until 1904, all right? And then there was a fire. We're going to hear about a lot of fires as I go along. That was just something that happened there often. All right. Before the fire, he sold it to a man named Tom McNear. And Tom McNear, when he bought the Fry Hotel, he changed the name to Hotel Monte Colfax. Doesn't that sound impressive? He had great plans for that, all right? But he only owned the hotel for about 14 months, and then it caught fire and burned to the ground, all right? So when you have a Colfax jug advertising the Monte Colfax, you know that's a short period of time that it was operating as the Monte Colfax. Lots of different hotels. Right? There were 19 mineral wells and 13 hotels, bottling works that existed in Colfax. Small ones like this is the Mills house. Mrs. Mills and her son Charlie traded a pair of mules for the lots where they were going to build this hotel. And so they erected that hotel. You can see the spring house off to the right there. They all had something like that when they'd get their well drilled. All right. Now, this one I'm going to spend a little more time on because it happens to be that a husband-wife team, Dr. Lewis and Alice Turner, both doctors, operated this hotel, right? It happens to be my wife's great aunt and uncle that ran that, and they're circled there. Lewis is on your right, and Alice is on the left there, and some of the nurses and patrons both on the porch. This was a big house, right? Probably the biggest house in Colfax, right? It was built by the banker. His name was George Wood. Now, what's interesting, I guess, with that is that after he had built the house, he fell into a scandal, right? A misappropriation of funds. And the newspaper reported that 2 of the board members went upstairs there at the bank building to confront him about that. He excused himself to an outer office and shot himself, right? That's when the Turners purchased the house and turned it into a sanitarium there. But Dr. Alice, in one of her brochures, I like the quote, "Don't be afraid to come on a cot. You won't have to leave on one." That was the claim that they made, and that many of the hotels made there. All right. Downtown, there was a really large brick hotel. Dr. Ryan was a pharmacist that built the first drugstore in Colfax. Right, it was a wood-framed structure. About 1880, he had this brick building built. And so it was named then the Hotel Ryan. It was changed to the Hotel Centropolis there, and finally the On-Spa Sanitarium there. What's interesting with this one is that built about 1880, and when they had drilled a well for that hotel, the water flowed to the top story. All right, so it was under pressure. It was under considerable amount of pressure if you could get water all the way to the top floor. Now, I told you there were 19 wells that were drilled around the area there, and it seems that the pressure there on the vein of water diminished. So by the time everything was all said and done, the water was not under nearly as much pressure there. They kept draining off with another well. All right, now we come to the Hotel Colfax. And any of those owners of those smaller hotels will tell you that the big one, all right, was the Hotel Colfax. And all these other hotels were kind of feeding off the excess there of people that were coming to the Hotel Colfax, all right? It was certainly the largest. It was the most famous eventually to be. But we'll start with that hotel I showed you at the beginning, that very first one, okay? It burned in 1881, Thanksgiving Day, and it was destroyed. Now, they decided not to rebuild at its site. They built way up on the hill where you were a long ways away from, steam locomotives that were throwing out sparks and all that kind of danger that would happen. And so what started as that hotel became the Colfax Springs Sanitarium. Right? Now, it was a large and beautiful hotel. Colfax and the water is tied with the Rock Island Railroad closely. Railroads had money. And so they were investing into Colfax and Colfax mineral water there. But here's the trade card for that Colfax Springs Sanitarium, right? It was 200 rooms, all wood, and you had to go up on the hill to get to that hotel. Now, Schuyler Colfax, I told you the town of Colfax is named after him. Schuyler Colfax actually spoke at the dedication of this hotel up on the hill. So it was a big deal. What I like also is the newspaper over here. When we're finished, take a look at that. That's that same hotel that's pictured on that newspaper, right? And it was going to be open soon. It was 1883 that newspaper was published, and it was going to be opening soon there. All right. I told you had to get the people from down where that hotel was up on the hill to where this one was, and they did that by way of an inclined railroad. So what we're looking at is the depot. It had its own depot down there, about a mile outside of Colfax, and then you can see the railroad grade that goes up the hill to the hotel. And so that carried passengers and luggage from the depot where they would unload and up to the hotel. It was steam operated, had a boiler that ran the machinery there. The hotel went through changes, built in '84 and sold at a trustee sale in 1892, right? For like 10 cents on the dollar is what it sold for. A man named Wesley Jordan purchased it and ran it for about 10 years, and it turns around and sold again. So, not every time. In fact, most of these hotels at some point went through something like that and sold. But it was then purchased by Colonel Donahue. Now, Colonel Donahue was from Davenport. Donahue, that was a very wealthy family that lived out there. And his wife, Emily, had rheumatism. They went all the way to Carlsbad, Germany, to take the waters because the doctors had said, go take the waters. And she found relief. Now, it's then that he learned that, well, you don't have to go to Germany. There's similar water in Colfax, Iowa. At the very time that the hotel was for sale. And so Donahue invested a huge amount of money in that. In 1904, when he purchased that hotel, he then did all of those improvements that you see listed there. Now, $700,000 in 1909, when it opened, is the equivalent of like $26 million in today money. Now, there also were a number of improvements besides just to the hotel there. He did a big addition, and then there's a 6-hole golf course. He added the electrical plant that it didn't have then, the water system, the electric trolley, did away with that tram that I showed you that went there, and he did an electric railway from downtown Colfax a mile out to the hotel and carried passengers that way. And a garage to service automobiles. Autos were becoming the thing way back then, and so added that as well. But the addition that he made to that hotel was another 100 rooms, and it was what they called fireproof. Instead of wood, it was steel, brick, it was mortar, and then a stucco finish on the outside. So it was fireproof, supposedly, there. All right. Oh, and I got to tell you that a quote that he had for the papers was, okay, if it doesn't work out, if the venture doesn't work out, it'll make a really nice summer home for he and his wife there. Only somebody with money talks like that, right? That's what I think here. But yeah, I did find it interesting. My great aunt Florence was the personal attendant to his wife, Mrs. Donahue. So it was neat. But we have lots of postcards that show the new Hotel Colfax there and how it looked, and it was a grand place. This is the hotel that still exists in part today, and Sheepgate, Teen Challenge of the Midlands is who purchased that ultimately and operate it now today as a drug and alcohol treatment facility. Inside, it had everything that you were looking for. It was the spa kind of hotel there. And so you'd get massages. You would take baths. In fact, they got water into you every way that they could get it into you. That mineral water has a real laxative effect. Now, that's probably the main reason why it was considered good for you, is go to a place and get cleaned out good. It has to help us, right? And so that was being done. So you took baths in the water. You drank water upon rising. You had a glass of water. You had it at every meal. And when you went to bed, you had a nice warm glass of mineral water before you went to sleep. So yes, my uncle, grandfather's brother, he told me that the only way to drink it was ice cold. And he kept a fruit jar in the refrigerator, and he lived with my grandparents for a while, and I remember that fruit jar of mineral water in the refrigerator, and he says the only way you could drink it was ice cold. That helped it. So warmed had to be kind of nasty. Well, they did ultimately, but they really didn't much, during that time here. There was an orchestra that played for noonday meal and then the supper, and so it was catering to the more elite side of things there. In fact, I've got a menu, and this isn't even for the Hotel Colfax. This is for one of the smaller hotels, all right? The Grand Hotel that I had pictured by Mr. Cole had. But just listen to the dinner that you could have, and dinner was lunch. Now, you could have in the season of 1884, you could have tomato soup, and then you'd have baked lake trout. You could have your choice of boiled ham, corned beef and cabbage, or tongue. The roasts were rib of beef with brown potatoes, roast lamb with green peas, sirloin of beef, and veal with dressing. The entrees were beefsteak pie or macaroni with cheese. Vegetables were mashed potatoes, succotash, steamed potatoes, beets, sliced cucumbers, boiled cabbage, or squash. And then for dessert, you could have peach pie, baked Indian pudding, London layer raisins, cake, vanilla ice cream, and then nuts, coffee, or tea. And then the very last thing here at the bottom, Colfax mineral water. Yeah. Mm-hmm. All right. So it went through a period of time where it was a grand place. And then came World War I. Now, World War I was not good for most people running hotels because it was hard to get materials shipped to you or even available because of the war effort. So many hotels had to shut down during that time. Now, it had a double whammy because it was right about that time that the medical community kind of fell out of favor here with mineral water, right? So take those two things, put them together, that the mineral water industry in Colfax did its big decline, right? And this hotel closed in 1915, all right? Now, Colonel Donahue, he was no dummy. And so he had an opportunity to lease that facility to the federal government, right? And it became the U.S. Public Health Hospital, Service Hospital, right? And it was a Veterans Hospital. Now, we know the Veterans Hospital to have been in Knoxville. It didn't exist in Knoxville when he leased that to the government. Now, he put a rock-solid lease in there. It was going to last his entire life that he would have it leased to the government. And things were going just fine. Now, my father-in-law tells a story that he got from his father. They had a drugstore right downtown. And, of course, you see everything going on downtown in Colfax there. The general that was at that facility, that ran that facility, he, you know these old cars where you sit in the enclosed part and the driver sits out there in the open, you know, those huge things? All right? The general is downtown at Colfax for whatever business he had. And the driver turned it around in the middle of the street to bring it back the other way, and the town marshal wrote him a ticket. And according to my father-in-law, his dad says the general was not happy. He was red-faced and he was screaming. And he says, you'll regret the day that you wrote this ticket. And the hospital was moved ultimately to Knoxville. Right? Now, the only thing Donahue did wrong is when he leased the facility, he leased it with all of the furnishings inside. They became the property of the government, and the government took most of anything that was movable out of there. So that stuff, I would love to have seen it stay in the hotel, of course, there. But that was the story of the hospital. Now an interesting one. The same facility, right? It became the National Swine Palace. Went from, orchestras playing and dances and all these things to the National Swine Palace. Okay, Fox Built Feeds is who purchased that. And it wasn't just a promotion kind of thing. There were hogs. They modified the first story of rooms to be the pens where the hogs were kept. They sold hogs through right there. The auctioneer set up on the platform where the orchestra at one time played and sold hogs there. It was a fairly short period of time that it was the Swine Palace, all right? And after it ceased to be that, it was leased to the River Oaks Alcohol and Treatment Center. A doctor in Des Moines that ran it there, and it had a very good track record for people there going through that period. But it was, again, a short-lived time that it was that. And then it became the Salvatorian Novitiate. And that's when a whole nother floor was added there at the top. So that's the reason for the change here. It's now one floor higher. These were men that lived there, and they were training for the Catholic faith, and they did all the work out there. So whatever needed to be done, they added the fourth floor there of that. When it ceased to be the novitiate, it became the Colfax Interfaith Center, operated that for a time, and then finally Sheepgate, or the Teen Challenge of the Midlands, purchased it, and they're the present owner. But it's only a small portion of what that hotel was. Right? In 1945, all the wood structure was torn down. The 1884 part had to be torn down. So all that's left is what Donahue added, or most of what Donahue added in 1909 there. All right. If you came to take the waters in around 1900, right, you'd wanted to take back a souvenir. So I'm amazed at the amount of china pieces with the pictures of the hotels there that you could buy and take home. And of course, those went all over the country there to wherever the people lived. And I brought a couple up here for you to take a look at there. But that was the thing that you did at that period of time. And so there's hundreds of different souvenir pieces that are there. And then the mineral water bottles. There's lots of bottles. At the museum there in Colfax, we have a lot of different bottles that were shipped out with those. Now, when we said something about flavored water, all right? They did do flavored water here. I'm not even sure if it was true mineral water sometimes that they were doing. They may have been using others as well. But there are lots and lots of different sodas. That this is orange, and this is ginger ale, and there's white soda and root beer. And so they did their sodas that were quite popular there for a time period. I do like the little wax carton. The milk carton reminds you of that, just covered with the different, what the ingredients were in the mineral water there that you could buy. So Colfax and mineral water had a lot of entrepreneurs. I guess that's what I would say. Men that were willing to gamble with, putting up big hotels and shipping and trying different things there so that they could make a buck, and did for a time. All right. But if you've heard of Colfax mineral water, you may well have heard of the jugs that were shipped out of there and that people could buy. 7.5 pounds per gallon, a 5-gallon jug's besides the stoneware jug, it's a pretty heavy thing to move around there. There's a 1906 ad of you could buy a 5-gallon jug of water for $1 and then bring it back and have it refilled for 50 cents. So the thing that I regret is I had no relatives that were buying up all sorts of jugs and sticking them off, into the basement there for 50 cents a piece. But yeah, lots and lots. I tell people, if you were a stoneware salesman, right, you loved coming to Colfax. Whether it was for the Red Wing Stoneware Company, Mama's Stoneware Company, Macomb Stoneware Company, Fort Dodge Stoneware Company, they all sold jugs to merchants in Colfax. And so you see all sorts of advertising there for these jugs. And so that means that there's a lot of different jugs. And my wife and I have 48 different sizes and logos and things there that existed there with those jugs. All right. Tom Jordan, his dad ran the Hotel Colfax for about 10 years, and Tom operated a mineral well. So he had one drilled and operated that. And in fact, that's the ad I was telling you about. Send $1 for a 5-gallon jug filled with fresh mineral water and have it refilled for 50 cents. All right. And Magnetic Rock Springs, one of the very first of the bottlers of the water, his name was Webb Dart. And Webb Dart had this really great idea to call it magnetic water. Magnetic Rock Springs is what he named the thing, and it was carbonated water. That's all he did, was add the carbonation, just like we do with soda pop today. But it was promoted as, it naturally occurred when they were drilling, going through the rock. It carbonized that water, and wasn't true. But it was a good ploy. He promoted the bottling works well, probably the first one to really promote it out there across the country. And it happens to be in this newspaper, in the letter to the editor, all right, is a letter that was published, all right, written by Mark Twain. Now, Mark Twain had a real sense of humor, right? And so he sent a letter to the owner of the Magnetic Rock Springs, to Webb Dart. And it says, "Dear sirs, I find the following in your advertising pamphlet. Our Magnetic Rock Spring is 335 feet deep and has a flow of 5,000 gallons in 24 hours. Yes. And then he says, also in the pamphlet, it says, our Magnetic Rock Springs water cures rheumatism, dyspepsia, liver complaint, constipation, dropsy, paralysis, St. Vitus dance. You ever heard of that before? Okay. Delirium, tremens, diabetes, stone in the bladder, blood diseases, scrofula, ulcers, female weakness, and general debility." Right? And this was right out of his pamphlet. So that's what Webb Dart was saying that the mineral water would cure. He says, I do believe that is what is the matter with me. It reads just like my symptoms. Therefore, please send me with a bill 1 barrel of your magnetic water, and if I like it, I will take the rest. Also, please instruct me as to the dose for adult. Also, what do you put with it? I mean, what do you put with it to divert your mind from observing that you are taking medicine? Will it go with temperance beverages? I mean, soda water, lemonade, panada, milk, whiskey, and such things? I'm thus strict because I am a grandson of temperance, my father having been a son of temperance. Temperance is deeply embedded in our family. It is for this reason that I ask and repeat, will it go with temperance beverages? Will it go with the moistures I have mentioned? If with whiskey, what portion of the water is best, combined with what disproportion of whiskey? Right. Signed, yours in alert expectancy, Mark Twain. So we don't have any record that he ever visited Colfax, but he did send a letter to Webb Dart. Magnetic Rock Springs was sold after he passed away by the widow to the Colfax Bottling Works, to Cyrus Wells. And there's also the Fry's Bottling Works, Dr. Abner Fry, who had the hotel. His son Dan ran a bottling works there. And that brings us to the Museum and Community Center in Colfax. So that's where we've got, I think, some very interesting displays for you to take a look at there. Some of the things that we've talked about. Now, I told Gail I can give programs on the heroes from Colfax, because there are several, right? There's a folding table company. It was called the Monroe Company. And they came and they operated as a family business, manufacturing business for 100 years. And they built poultry equipment, they built canvas houses, and then ultimately these folding tables that were known across the country at one time. So lots and lots of rich history in Colfax. So it's right off the interstate. When you get off for the Colfax exit, it's before you get to the river, there's that building there. And so we invite you to come and take a look at that. Second Saturdays from 10 to 2, and then Sundays from 2 to 4, Memorial Day through Labor Day. So we're opening shortly for those Sunday hours. And it's also available by appointment. So if you call and you get the answering machine and you say, I'd like to come with my group or something else, we'll work at getting somebody to open that up and take a look at it there. So, all right. With that, I'm to the end of things. Are there any questions that you have? Yes?
You haven't mentioned one medical thing. And I'm wondering, was it tested somewhere that it was really good for all these conditions?
Well, it was accepted by the medical community that it was. So the owners of the hotels, they all had a resident doctor. All right, and in some cases more than one, trained nurses and bath attendants at some. And so it was very much accepted by that community. Now I don't know what proof they would have there. Back at close to the turn of the century, they called it cure. Well, we know now that cures for all those things don't exist. But it's certainly, I believe completely that there were many people that felt much better after taking the waters there. It can be up here, yep. But the year that the new Hotel Cofax opened in 1909, 30,000 visitors came that year. It wasn't little stuff there. There were some big. Some years they shipped 250,000 gallons of water out of the town. So there was a period of time that it was very well accepted, and then it fell out of that. It does remind me, and I'll just grab this little bottle here. There was a fella, his name was Lee Schmidt, that invested a lot of his retirement funds into opening up one of the wells and bottling the water, right? I heard the biggest problem, it only existed for a short amount of time, and one of the biggest problems was, who are you competing with? Coca-Cola's and all of these different companies that have the majority of shelf space in any place that sells water. So it never caught on like Lee wanted it to catch on here, but he did have one of the wells opened back up and bottled there for a time.
So are all the wells closed now?
Yes, the wells were capped. The wells still exist, even though those casings would have to have new casings and things in there. But even the Mineral Springs Park in Colfax, which was one of the wells, no longer has a running well. I can tell you that as a boy, when we would go to Colfax and ride our bicycles, I was a country boy, so it was really something to let Dad bring the bikes in the pickup and let us ride around town all day. Down at the fountain that was in the Mineral Springs Park, it did not taste good. It did not smell good. It was mineral water then, not anymore. But yes, it still exists there, right? With the changes, geology, hydrology kind of changes there. It's not under pressure that would force it to the top like it did 100 some years ago, like Old Faithful, right?
Where does Colfax get their water now?
It's right there at the Skunk River, right? I mean, it's from underground, but it's just a different aquifer, you could say, right? Yeah. It was never the municipal water supply in Colfax, the mineral water. All right, so they even then had water that they were getting from other places. All right, the mineral water was, lower and had all this high mineral content. Yeah. Did you have a question?
These various hotels and sanitariums, did people come and stay for periods of time, or was it basically I'm in and out?
Yes. How's that? Some were shorter periods of time.
Okay.
All right. Think of all the sales trade that would come and only be there long enough to, sell to the merchants that they were, visiting and things. The visitors for the water generally had a week or longer stays. That would depend on what was wrong with you and whether you were feeling better, I suppose, kind of how that would go. But yes, there were extended stays even.
So then, did they, I don't know if this is quite the correct term, dig the well or whatever to find the water, and then they built the hotels or the whatever around it. So who did they pay? Who owned the land where these entities existed?
For the most part, the hotel owner, whoever owned that, and they owned, most of the time,
They bought the land.
then they would, yep.
Okay.
You pretty much knew if you drilled 330 feet into the ground, you were going to hit that vein of water that was there. These weren't springs that came out of the side of the hill or a mountain or things like we think of a lot of times with springs. They're all underground there, and so yes, it still exists there. That vein of water still exists, yeah. But pretty much, if you drilled you say I want to build a hotel here, and you drill a hole, you were gonna hit that water, yeah.
I guess they're afraid of coal mines collapsing.
Boy, I hope not, because if you come to the museum, we have a big map of where the coal mines existed. Some of those mines were platted out underground, so you can see how large it was. One was like a square mile of underground mine. But there's a coal mine under the interstate right there by Colfax. So I know those engineers knew that, right? That information existed. So apparently they didn't care that down a couple hundred feet underground was a coal mine. So occasionally a sinkhole will show up from those mining activities, but north of town there have been several, yes. Yeah. What was kind of neat about Colfax is these mines existed all the way around. There's only one within what was the city limits of Colfax. Everything else was out, and that Colfax Northern Railroad would take miners out to these towns that were there. So you didn't have to live there, even though, maybe a couple hundred people did. Lots of Colfax town people then would travel out to work in the mines. Yeah. Colfax is 22 to 2,200?
Yeah, 2,250.
The Main Street director is in the back row. For Colfax Main Street, yes. He's also a relative of mine. We're a small town, right? So you have to watch what you say about people because, but, yeah.
My daughter dated somebody that wouldn't go fast. I'm just a little piece I didn't know about any of this motion.
Yeah, and we run into that all the time,
It's never advertised.
I went to all 12 grade or 13 grades of school. We didn't talk about Colfax mineral water or anything at that time. That wasn't part of the curriculum. Now, today, I believe it is somewhat, but it could be, there's a lot to to know about that industry. Yeah. Did you have a question?
Well, yeah, I did, if this drinking water, this is mainly just drinking water you're talking about. It has no relation to like FER went to the warm springs or his body.
Well, you have hot springs that you can go to, right, that come out of the ground and you can soak in. You could do the same thing in Colfax, but they had to heat it up. So these baths that people were taking, the same value that he was finding in those would also be there with those mineral baths and things, right? Yeah.
So the year that 30,000 people visited, was that the absolute height of annual visitors, or?
That's from what we can tell. Now, I wish people were, back then were recording things better, right? No, isn't that what we wish as historical societies? I'd like to ask, what we were. But we know that in 1909, that's what was shown with things. I will mention just briefly, when it was the Swine Palace, right? And it was time to sell it, all right? The fella that was in charge of selling it spent time there showing it and things. He saved 2 hotel registers out of that hotel, right? It opened in 1909. One of them is like December of 1909 through part of 1910 and then 1910 to 12. So here are these 2 registers. And oh my word, that is absolutely fantastic. What we've been able to figure out is they probably were the meal registers. So if you were coming to take the meal, then you got marked into here. And it is a who's who of Des Moines. All of it, Hubble, and there's all of these people that were taking the interurban out to Colfax, eating for dinner, for supper, and then traveling back, or spending the night. So the room numbers are recorded when it is, but there's a lot of people that, there isn't a room number recorded there. But that's an exciting thing to get. And I knew that they existed for a long time, but yep,
I'm a retirist, and if I lived in at that time, I would have over the 20. And if the records weren't kept, what should I say? In an accurate way. Wow.
And that sums up what the hotel owners in Colfax were thinking, right? That's why they were doing it, because here was an opportunity. We could build this big hotel and all these people would come. Not that they didn't want to help people. I'm sure they did. Everybody believed it, Mr. Dart took it a little farther here, but otherwise, yeah, it just is the way things happen, and it fell out of there.
I think that's a perfect way to end this conversation, capitalism, definitely. So thank you, Kevin, very much.
Yeah.
Do you mind hanging around a little bit to answer any questions
I
off
sure
camera?
don't.
Wonderful. Thank you all for coming today. I want to remind you, we had to cancel the March Iowa Files because of the weather. So that is rescheduled for 2 weeks from now, Sunday, April 26th at 3 p.m. And that is the story of the monuments men and women and saving history during World War II. So thank you so much for coming today and have a great week.